his topic and his way of presentation. So thank you all. And I request Bikash to deliver his lecture. Hello?
Yes, Bhai. Thank you, Bhai. Thank you for your very kind introduction. So I have also a presentation. I would like to share it while presenting. So Jaydev, if you are there, so please see whether it is there or not.
Yes, Bhai.
I am just showing my presentation. Please see it. Is it coming or not?
Okay. Bhai, right side corner में presentation now.
Is it coming?
No. Yes. Just 1 second. Yes.
It is visible, na?
Yes.
Okay. So should I start, Jaydev and Shiv Bhai? Should I start now?
Yes.
Good to go.
So Jaydev, I am also visible equally with presentation, huh?
हाँ भाई, पूरा handsome लग जो.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jaydev. Let me start. Let me start this talk by thanking our chair, Shiv Bhai, who has been very kind to introduce me with our family. So this is in the series of the Aama Prayas lecture that we are actually targeting the audiences like the students who are preparing for the exams, and also we are trying to enhance our knowledge by discussing with our friends like the Aama Prayas friends. There are so many knowledgeable people who they are actually share their different kind of knowledge from their different domain. So let me start by thanking Biswajit Pani, who is making it YouTube live for the Aama Prayas friends and for the Aama Prayas group. So thanks also Jaydev for kindly initiating this very important topic. So let's start. There are two topics in today's presentation. The very first topic is the labor laws reforms in India, and the very second topic is minimum wages in India. And when we talk about labor laws and minimum wages, both are somehow correlated to each other. And without the minimum wage security or the wage security, I think the labor laws are not fulfilled in its, or it is not, complete without the aspects of minimum wage. So in today's topic, basically, I will try to speak about the recent labor laws reform. Also, I will try to highlight that how the present context, basically the COVID-19 context, also related to different kind of labor laws, and how different kind of labor laws have been very much suitable or applicable to the present context, or to address the situation of the COVID-19 crisis in India. So let me first say that this lecture and the views expressed in this lecture are personal, nothing to do with my organization where I am employed, and the views expressed are completely personal and for education purpose only. So let me start by the labor force at first. So you all know, you all are aware that Government of India had started labor codes recently, very recently, and the underlying inspiration behind labor codes have come from Second National Commission on Labor, where 4 codes have been emerged under the kind of very different under the kind of the aspects that is very much related to labor. That is code on wages, code on industrial relations, code on social security, code on industrial safety and health. So, but one code has been passed till now by the Parliament. That code is known as Code on Wages 2019. So Code on Wages just passed in the last year in the month of August. But these laws have been are going to be codified into 4 labor codes. So let me start the first labor code, that is Code on Wages 2019. So you could see there are 4 acts under Code on Wages 2019. So the first code is the Minimum Wages Act 1948. The second is Payment of Wages Act 1936. Third is the Payment of Bonus Act 1965, and the fourth is the Equal Remuneration Act 1976. So the Minimum Wage Act is a historic piece of legislation. It is self-explanatory and it is self-sufficient. This act has served at its best to the country, and this act was made primarily to safeguard, the interest of the unorganized sector workers in the economy, basically in India, who they are vulnerable to social security, vulnerable to low level of wages. They are also vulnerable to different aspects of, conditions of service of labor. So that's why the Minimum Wage Act enacted, by which we could at least ensure the minimum wage to the large section of unorganized workers in India. Just a minute. Okay. So, so the next is the Payment of Wages Act. The Payment of Wages Act is basically there to ensure the payment of wages in a timely manner. So the present ceiling of the payment of wages is at rupees 24,000 per month. So if any employee whose salary is below rupees 24,000 per month, then these employees are coming under the purview of the Payment of Wages Act 1936. That's why you could say that there is provision that before the expiry of the 7th day of the wage period, where number of employees are less than 1,000, so the employee must have to pay the wage before the 7th day of the wage period. And in case the establishment that is more than 1,000 numbers of workers or employees, the wages shall be paid before the expiry of the 10th day of the end of the wage period. So the third act, we could say, the Payment of Bonus Act, that most the workers who are entitled for bonus. So the ceiling in the Bonus Act has been kept as rupees 21,000 per month. So the workers whose salary is less than rupees 21,000, they are entitled for payment of bonus. The payment of minimum bonus is 8.33%, up to 20% of the basic wage is to be paid to the employee. So the Bonus Act is applicable to the establishment which has over 20 employees, and it is somehow linked to profit and productivity. And the Equal Remuneration Act 1976, it is basically speak about that that there is no difference between male and female employee. So any kind of discrimination should be avoided when you are employing any woman employee in your organization or establishment. So it is to provide for equal remuneration to men or women workers for same work or work of similar nature without any discrimination, and it also prevents discrimination. So even in the field of recruitment and conditions of service, any condition of service, there must not be any kind of discrimination. So that's why in the Code on Wages, the most of the important things has been taken care. You could, as I already mentioned, you could see. So the second we will go that the second code is Code on Industrial Relation. So in the Code on Industrial Relation, we will find there are three very important acts. The first act is the Trade Union Act 1926. The second is the Industrial Employment Act 1946. Third is the Industrial Disproof Act 1947. In the first, basically, I will discuss once we will move forward that how the central trade unions have emerged. Basically, the central trade unions they are governed by the Trade Union Act 1926. To recognize the trade unions, this act has been enacted during 1926. And the industrial basically there are. Let me also say you there are 12 central trade unions. First one is not first one. There are 12 central trade unions. The first they are actually BMS, AITUC, AICCTU, CITU, HMS, INTUC, LPF, NI, NFITU, DHN, SEBA, TUCC, UTUC. So there are 12 central trade unions. The most important thing is that when we recognize the trade unions, they have to represent in different committees and different forum of Government of India. They are invited to give their very prominent views in terms of labor aspects, in terms of wage, in terms of social security, in terms of different aspects of labor. Actually, they are invited to give their views, to provide their representation. That's why the Trade Union Act was enacted since so long, we could see, but still it is serving our nation. So next is the Industrial Employment Standing Order Act 1946. So in this particular act, you will find to formally define conditions of employment where 100 or more workmen employed for central government. 100 or more workmen employed, but for central government, this condition has been reduced to 50. So the third, I'll just go through, just because my idea is to introduce with the labor laws in the central labor laws. So it will be a bit boring to you, but I think you will come to know that these are the acts which are actually governing the labor market in India. So it will be also a bit interesting, and you could ask me the questions related to any act you try to know, and I would like to also answer if I know, or if I find it that the area is actually significant. So let me also let me also focus on the Industrial Dispute Act. So the Industrial Dispute Act, it has provisions for the investigation and settlement of industrial disputes like closure, layoff, retrenchment. So all these kind of issues are actually governed by the Industrial Dispute Act 1947. So all these three acts are actually going to be merged under the Labor Code on Industrial Relation. So the code is on pre-legislative stage, so it has not been finalized yet, and if it is getting finalized, then definitely it is going to solve the present labor issues and the present movement of trade unions and the conditions of service. There is no doubt. So the next code is Code on Social Security and Welfare. So if you see, there are 11 acts under Code on Social Security and Welfare. So the very important act, basically I have just colored it in red, you could see, but yet I will start with the Employees Compensation Act. So any employee who actually who gets harmed during his duty in the factory, so they get compensation through this Employees Compensation Act. If suppose the worker dies or the worker gets injured, permanent disablement is there, then they are actually compensated by the Employees Compensation Act. And importantly, you could see that in the Maternity Benefit Act, as per amendment of Section 5 of the Maternity Benefit Amendment Act 2017, so maximum period for which a woman can get paid maternity benefit 26 weeks up to 2 surviving children. So up to this is a very important, though there are some criticisms of this enhancement of this paid leave period, but it is really to ensure and to actually accept the kind of difficulties that the women labor is attached when they are actually pregnant, or when they due to this pregnancy, and when you don't get any paid leave. So it is a very much important amendment and important legislation in terms of social security to the women. So, and the very important present context act, I could see that this is the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008. I think this act has been also, been criticized very much by many of the trade union activists and many of the social activists. But this act has been, has been enacted in 2008, and the present kind of COVID situation has been, there was a important, there were important provisions which could address, or which addressed, I could say, the problems of unorganized sector social security. So during this act, there were National Social Security Fund of 2010 and 11. So there was a fund created keeping in mind the social security of, unorganized workers. So basically, it targeted weavers, story tappers, rickshaw pullers, BD workers like these workers. Only 11 states till now have able to frame rules. 10 states have Social Security Board. Now total fund is around 1927 crore from the actual sanction amount of around 4,500 crore since 2011-12. So you could see that the unorganized sector worker Social Security Act has been somehow not given, the kind of potential it had to serve the economy has somehow been undermined. So let's focus on the next act, which has been very paramount in present COVID crisis. This act is known as the Building and Other Construction Workers Cess Act 1996. So if I say that, most of the construction workers and building workers, they have covered through this cess and through this cess. So during this time, so they have given actually around 5,000 crore disbursement by the states. The total fund is around more than 30,000 crore, and they have been, given the help during this time, arounding rupees 1,000 to rupees 6,000. States government have their state welfare boards under the act, and the workers have to register, and their registration have to be renewal. And after that, what happens that they actually, get their due when this kind of crisis comes. So the Building and Other Construction Workers Cess Act actually helped the migrant laborers in a very, very, effective manner, and the disbursement has been possible because of their timely registration and renewal. So, what are then the Labor Code on Occupational Safety and Health and Working Conditions. So let me also just go through very quickly on this Labor Code. I'm getting some disturbance. Okay. So Labor Code on Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions, you could also see there are 13 acts under this Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions. The first one is the Factories Act 1948. Second one, you could see the Plantation Labor Act 1951. So in the Factory Act, very, I think most of the research scholars, they know how the factory is defined as per the provisions of 2MI, Section 2MI and Section 2MII. So 10 or more workers with using power and 20 or more workers without using power have been, termed as the registered and unregistered workers as per the Factories Act 1948. So the next is the Plantation Labor Act. The Plantation Labor Act basically speaks about the tea and coffee garden workers. So the workers, they are engaged in tea and coffee plantation, their welfare and conditions of services are taken care in the Plantation Labor Act 1951. And the third is very, very important legislation, that is Interstate Migrant Worker Regulation of Employment and Condition of Service Act 1979. So I could say that this is the act which I think was enacted to address this kind of situation that we are facing today. So to prevent the exploitation of migrants, interstate migrant workers, to create a database for transient migrant laborers. So these are the objectives: provisions of license from migrant workers, state and other essential, other essential amenities. It was required to obtain a certificate of registration. So this act, you see, the act is so not so old like the Trade Union Act in 1926, but this act has been somehow have the provisions which could have actually solved the problems of the present crisis of migrant workers. So somehow this act, now we could say that criticism is that due to lack of will, the act failed. 6 major migrant states that we all know, that UP, MP, Bihar, Odisha, Jharkhand and Rajasthan, they have more migrant laborers who they go to the cities or the urban towns to actually
तो बात ये
find
कि
their employment. So as per 2011, there are
That's something called
5.6
casual
crore
talk.
interstate
और वो
migrant.
मेरी
11
attitude है, casual
2011
talk का।
census, I mean,
वो तो
there are
irritate करता है।
5.6 crore interstate
But
migrant workers.
मुझे लगता
So
है
in
कि
our
ऐसे जो
country,
mood swings होता है,
critics say
उसके
it
और
is
भी reasons
never
हैं,
the
just not
lack
वो
of
तेरा
legislation,
reason नहीं है।
but it is always the lack of will, efficacy, implementation of the law that fails
और
it.
कभी-कभी
So
मेरे
in
कुछ
this act,
और
that
एक्टिविटी
this
के
is the
लिए भी
biggest
होता है, लेकिन आप
criticism,
ब्लेम
that this
करते हो वही
act has
चीज
been
की है
failed
जो
because of lack of
और
will, somehow,
reason कुछ और चीज
people
हो
say.
सकता है।
But this act had all the potential to actually solve the problems of the interstate migrant workers during a crisis like COVID that we faced. And the next important act, let me just quickly go, the Working Journalist Act 1958. So journalists whose salary or wages are fixed under this act. Sales Promotions Employees Act, like the medical representatives, their conditions of service. This is addressed by the Sales Promotion Employee Act. So I just tried to, just go through the labor acts. The 40 labor acts you saw here is basically addressing the different aspects of labors in India. And all these labor codes are codified under four, major themes. That is, I told you, wage, industrial relation, social security, and industrial safety and health. So all these four things has to be, there to rationalize the provisions of these some very old acts and some to address the present context, address the present emerging economic situation both in domestic and both international, even in internationally. So I mean to say that why labor codes are required, that the very fundamental points that we tried to understood, that we required it because of, looking at the emerging economic situations, to make it flexible, to sync it with the, present environment of different, kind of situation. So what is the way forward? Let me also just complete this part of the presentation by saying that labor codes must take into consideration the employment loss during the COVID-19 kind of situation, not to suspend labor regulations, but to make it more labor friendly during difficult situations. So this is a difficult situation, and the solution is not that you suspend labor regulation by like some states have done, but it has to be carefully done. So if it is really required to suspend or to revive the economy, then you can. But if it is there to exploit or to not to address the welfare of the labor, then it has to be avoided. Because I mean to say, there is a very important confusion that I say labor is not the only factor of production. So there are many factors of production. Government has already given, different kinds of, monetary help or different kind of helps in terms of management. So to reduce the cost. So once you are focusing on the wage part only, then somehow we'll do major mistakes, and the exploitation will be there, and the efficiency of the labor somehow will be compromised. So the second important aspect that I just went through the economist, and I found that we must strike a proper balance between flexibility and security. So the labor laws should be flexible. So it should not be very much rigid. So once it is rigid, it cannot work in a very diverse country like India. So India is, we know, very diverse. So there are different kind of geographical and climatic differences, as well as social and economic differences. So the flexibility is there. So you also know that labor and wage are there in the concurrent list. So there are three lists in the constitution: union list, state list, and concurrent list. So in the concurrent list, basically, so both the state government and central government are empowered to make laws. So once both are there, but it has to be in concurrence with the central government. So the flexibility will actually work better in the context of India rather than the rigidity. That's why labor codes must be flexible. So once it is flexible, then it could also address the different kind of emerging situations. So, Amitabh Kant somehow said in the third point that labor codes and the present COVID kind of situation has actually, signaled to end Inspector Raj, red tapeism, etc., to e-governance initiatives. Like you all know that the inspections have been done through now, online. That through there are also physical inspections. I won't say that we have international obligations also. We could not end physical inspection. We have to do both inspection in a very balanced manner. So this is the first part I tried to cover on labor codes. If you find any questions on this labor codes, I would try to answer all of you. But I know that the labor laws are very diverse, and every act needs at least one hour to discuss on it, and every act has its own dimensions and objectives to address different contexts of labor. That's why I will urge the researchers here who are listening to me to very carefully see the laws, acts, rules in our country, and the contributions you will make while you will read the acts and the rules, that will be very paramount in nature. So once when the government asks for suggestion, or the different part of the government, they ask for suggestions in laws or acts or in the rules, so we must read it carefully, that what is required and how the international scenario is working. So in context of minimum wage, I will also try to see some international context. So let's start our next page of presentation, that is known as minimum wage. So here two policy aspects are there. Whenever I talk the fiscal policy, monetary policy, other different kind of policy, I always talk that how labor policy is also important. But when we say about labor policy, so wage policy and the minimum wage are also equally important, and the minimum wage and collective bargaining are two policy instruments. So without collective bargaining, minimum wage, may not be very much effective. So the pertinent questions that we find, as I have highlighted the 7 questions, how to define a minimum wage, how many different minimum wages should be there, who should set minimum wage, who should be getting minimum wage, setting and adjusting minimum wage level, how to reinforce minimum wage, monitoring the effects of minimum wage. So minimum wage is the minimum amount of remuneration paid to the worker for his given work in a certain period of time. So let's also see this slide where I have also tried to properly highlight. So minimum amount of remuneration paid to wage earners for the work performed in a given time period. It cannot be reduced by collective agreement or individual contract. So as I have labor codes, I said you that this collective agreement or the collective bargaining kind of thing. So this is done by this is also part of tripartite consultation. When you say that any policy is taking place by the government of India, it never happens without the tripartite consultation. So you have to take into consideration the views of your stakeholders. So without the views and inputs of the stakeholders, your act may not be fulfilling the the aspirations of the labor or aspirations of the economy. Now that's why I say that the second part, historically it has been evolved from a policy tool to be used in selectively in a few low wage sectors to an instrument of much broader coverage. So the coverage should be actually much broader, and in the code on wages that I discussed with you, so now the scheduled employments have to be scrapped. It means what were scheduled employments? Let me just highlight you. So minimum wage is applicable for scheduled employments. So scheduled employments are those employments where there are more than 1,000 workers working, and that occupation where thousands workers are working has to be identified there as scheduled in the Minimum Wage Act. then the minimum wage act the minimum wage should be fixed for them. So let's say the domestic worker example. If the domestic worker has to get minimum wage, then first of all, we know that there are more than 1,000 workers in the domestic worker occupation. So if they have to get minimum wage, then it has to be there in the schedule. It has to get place in the schedule. So once it get a place in the schedule, then government will fix its minimum wage. And minimum wage is statutory. It is mandatory. You have to pay it. Without paying minimum wage, it will termed as you are recruiting bonded labor. So not paying minimum wage is termed as bonded labor, the worker to whom you give less than minimum wage. So let's also, their time is short, let me also go through quickly that you also get some interest on this. So minimum wage is also very important in terms of just and equitable share of progress to all. It means that you have to equitably share the GDP, means the per capita income should also get increased through the wage and income support. So until unless you are reaching out to the masses of the people who they get at least the share through minimum wage. So we have to protect these workers against unduly low pay, and we must ensure that they are getting just and equitable share of progress to all. So it can be an element of policy to overcome poverty and inequality. Let me say you very clearly that there are evidence that minimum wages are very much helpful to reduce poverty and to reduce inequality. So, but the problem is what that subsequently I will discuss with you. That problem is that the minimum wage system in India is very complex. So it is complex because there are many number of minimum wages which are difficult to implement. So states have their minimum wages, central sphere have their minimum wages. Both central government and state government, they have their own jurisdiction to fix, revise and review the minimum wage. So what happens, he say in Odisha there are different types of minimum wage. In Kerala there are different types of minimum wages. If you add all the minimum wages, you will find there are more than 2,000 minimum wages in India. So once there are more than 2,000 minimum wages, how will you implement it? How will you enforce it? So enforce will be a problem. So if you take the example of central sphere, gradually I will show you, and I will just keep this is coming to my mind, that's why I am speaking my mind, also the facts. So if there are more than even central sphere, you will find there are difference between unskilled, skilled, semi-skilled, skilled and highly skilled. So even one unskilled minimum wage have three components in terms of geography: area C, area B, area A. The rural area, semi-urban area or the urban area. But the area A, B, C that I mentioned here in terms of minimum wage, it is basically referring to the HRA component by the Ministry of Finance's office memorandum. They have actually categorized the different cities and towns, which is A, B and C. On that basis minimum wages are applicable. So let me also go to the next slide, and I'll discuss a bit more of that aspect. So yes, so there are three aspects. So Committee on Fair Wages in 1948, they talked about three things. One is minimum wage, another is fair wage, and another third one is living wage. So our always target is to go from minimum wage to living wage. It means living wage reflects the standard of living, and minimum wage is a subsistence level wage. Sustenance plus efficiency of workers are are maintained by minimum wage. So it also includes education, medical requirement and amenities, and the lower level of the fair wage is minimum wage, and the higher capacity to pay is the upper limit of the fair wage. But the living wage, not only the bare essentials of food, clothing and shelter, but a measure of frugal comfort, including education for children, protection, protection against ill health, requirement of essential social needs, and a measure of insurance against the more important misfortunes, including old age. I think the time is running very fast, so let me also quickly go through this. Okay, so this is a diagrammatic representation. It will interest you if you can see. See, this is minimum wage, this is fair wage, and this is living wage. So the lowest level of fair wage is minimum wage, and the living wage should be the target of every welfareistic country. So we must provide a living wage to our labor force, so they can actually live a very respectable life. So every labor requires dignity. Every labor have the right to live in a very effective manner that others are living. You can say the major proportion of the population, like the past 20-30% who are rich. So every individual as a labor have the right to have their living wage. So just quickly go through that minimum wage and collective bargaining. In this slide, I would like to say that minimum wage sets the floor. So suppose say the minimum wage fixed at 250 rupees, but in Himachal, that people will say, see, 250 rupees is not actually should not be applicable to Himachal Pradesh. It is a hilly region, so you must bargain. So the trade unions and other stakeholders must bargain, but the floor should not be vitiated. The floor should be maintained. The sanctity of the minimum wage should be maintained, and then only you could actually increase upon the minimum wage. So that is the two aspects how they are actually correlated. So the collective bargaining implies the terms of employment, determining the working condition, regulating relations between employers and workers. So let me also quickly go through. So the keep minimum wage system as complex as necessary and as simple as possible. So the ILO document speaks this, that you have to keep your minimum wage system as simple as possible. So how many minimum wages? There could be single, there could be multiple minimum wages. As I said, there are more than 2,000 minimum wages in India. So in single, it is simple to operate, but if it is multiple minimum wages, so we could also argue in the diverse country like India actually should go for multiple minimum wages, keeping the different aspects in mind. So how? Let me see. The multiple, it could be national, it could be regional, it could be sectoral, it could be occupational, it could depend on enterprise size. So the time is short, so you could just see, and let me also quickly go through the second slide. So the Minimum Wage Act, as I mentioned you, it is to fix, revise, review and reinforce for the scheduled employments. I have also given you understanding what is scheduled employment. So another aspect in the minimum wage, let me also very importantly highlight, this is national floor level minimum wage. So what is national floor level minimum wage? So this is a floor. This is to address the kind of inequality among wages in our different states. So when NFL-MW is set, but the important aspect about the NFL-MW that it is not statutory, it is indicative in nature, so it is non-statutory. So we just try to, means the government of India request the state government, see, I am setting the floor level minimum wage, this is the floor, so please don't go below that national floor level minimum wage. So please maintain, at least please address the inequality among inequality of minimum wages among states. So it came, you could see that I am not going in detail to this concept. You could see that National Commission on Rural Labor in 1991 gave this concept, but it was mooted in 1998. So now the national floor level minimum wage in India is rupees 176 only. So you could see this picture. So I have made this picture here. So you could see this picture. So this is about, this line is about national floor level minimum wage. So most of the states are more than this national floor level wage, except this, the data is for 2019. However, you could also check the recent data. So Delhi has the highest minimum wage. So this is unskilled minimum wage. So I have not yet shown you the skilled, semi-skilled, highly skilled minimum wage. They could be also different. So you could actually find, how that 176. But one important thing, maybe I would like for your knowledge to express that the basis of the 176 rupees is also always questioned. That what is the basis of finding this, and the base has not been revised since 1998, and the base of the NFLMW has to be revised. If it is revised, then that 176 will be somehow around 250 or like this. So that I could say that that is a matter of matter of and the prerogative of the government when it is going to revise or not revise. But for your knowledge, I am just highlighting the main aspects of this. So, and how NFLMW is adjusted? It is adjusted by CPI-IW. I am not going to give more time on this, but I am just trying to say through the CPI-IW, and once the number you find, this is the way of calculation. You can ask me about the calculation. I am not going to spend much time. This is just an example of the central sphere minimum wage. You could see there are 7 scheduled employments major categories: agriculture, workers engaged in stone mines for stone breaking and stone crossing, sweeping and cleaning, watch and ward, loading and unloading, construction, non-coal mines. So these are the sectors where central sphere minimum wage is applicable. As I told you, area C, area B, area A. You could see that unskilled also have 3 minimum wages. So for area C it is different, area B it is different, area A it is different. So like that there are 4. So semi-skilled, skilled, highly skilled. So the wages are different. So that's why this creates the system complex. So let me also focus. Just I will complete in 10 minutes. So please don't worry. I will complete in 10 minutes. So just see the definition of skills that you could read it through. I am not going to spend much time on this. Just I will spend 1-2 minutes on this. How we are calculating minimum wage presently. You see, the ILC norm is actually referred while we are calculating the minimum wage, and the minimum wage is first calculated for unskilled wage and class C city, as I show you area C. So at the first, if you calculate in that way, you come to rupees 350. So I think in subsequent lectures I could discuss it more, that that an expert committee was constituted under Ministry of Labor and Employment, where I got the privilege to be a member, and we very deeply calculated on the basis of NSSO data, NSSO Consumption Expenditure Survey 2011-12, taking the CPI-IW prices, how the numbers are different, even for the different geographical regions. By taking, the composite index, we have tried to categorize the regions, the states into different regions. There are different 9 to 10 indicators we have taken, and we have tried to calculate evidence-based minimum wage and a scientific methodology to derive at a minimum wage, which has to be which is actually a subsistence level wage, we could see, but that is based on subsistence, based on evidence. So next, setting and adjusting, I have already highlighted that if set too low, if minimum wage is setting at too low level, then it cannot protect workers and their families. If it is set too high, then it may have adverse employment effects. So minimum wage setting has to be in a very balanced manner, that it must not have adverse employment effect, it must not also failing in protecting workers and their families. So a balanced and evidence-based approach is necessary for highlighting minimum. There are you could see that different BRICS countries that I have tried to highlight, that how they have setting the minimum. So the coverage part, you could see that Brazil, all workers are covered. In case of China, all workers are included. Provinces can also define minimum wage. I'm just running through because of lack of time. I don't want to make you bore in this topic. But please see, this is very important, because once you gain interest, now you will like it. Otherwise, it will be like just sing and forgetting. So because we have to also cope up with the BRICS countries, at least BRICS countries, because our development aspects are somehow similar with these countries. So if these countries are far ahead in terms of coverage in minimum in terms of minimum wage, we must also catch up with all these countries. And in terms of also you can see the criteria. So minimum wage, as I mentioned, in India, it is based on a consumption basket, but it is not including the kind of indicators like GDP, inflation, unemployment, and other countries like Brazil, China, Russia, South Africa somehow include that. Even Malaysia take the unemployment and GDP while considering the minimum wage. It means it is linked to economic factors, and the ILO guidelines also speak when you are fixing minimum wage, you must focus on the economic factors. So the economic factors, like I am speaking, that productivity and your GDP growth, your other aspects like unemployment aspect. So how it is adjusted in different countries like Brazil, China, Russia, South Africa, and India. So in case of India, the VDA, variable dearness allowances, are applicable in 2 times in a year. So in April and October, we actually, adjust the minimum wage. The Chief Labour Commissioner Office, they come out with the notice as per the variable dearness allowances. And India, in adjustment, we could say that India is doing well. In every April and October, they adjust minimum wage. So you can say the NFLMW, like I have said, this 176 daily, it is adjusted once in 2 years. So this has to be adjusted frequently also. So in the next slide, I am not going to discuss this more because already time is short, and I could say that in India we just refer 15th session of Indian Labour Conference as well as 1991 Supreme Court judgment to calculate minimum wage. So the limitations of existing norms, just this is very important. Let me just focus and just spend 2 minutes. That composition of food basket under present condition. It means the food basket should not be only calorie oriented. It means it must take into consideration the nutritional aspects, the fat aspects which is required to have, which is required for a human being to live for a balanced diet. So consumption basket should be converted into a balanced diet aspect. So number of 3 consumption units. This is also a bit technical. In the next, if anybody is interested, they could have more discussion with me. So the number of 3 consumption units that most of the trade unions, they actually say make it 6 consumption units. What is that consumption units? The consumption units are derived through the ICMR scale, nutritional scale. So suppose in the age group, what is the nutritional or energy requirement for different age group people? So to address the nutritional requirement of one labor and their families, so the family size is converted into consumption units. So once the family size is converted into consumption units, now the evidence says the family size in India is 4.6. And once you convert it with the wage earner, in India, the household wage earner is 1.4. So there is a linkage of consumption unit with wage earner as well as the family size. So the 3 consumption unit, now the evidence says it has to be 3.6. And why CPI IW? Definitely there is a question always. There is CPI rural, there is CPI urban, there is CPI combined by Ministry of Statistics. But the CPI IW, CPI AL and CPI RL are taken from Labor Bureau. So CPI IW somehow more representative, and the trade unions, basically what happens, they are agreed with CPI IW, and it has some historical context. But there are obviously researchers, they criticize that CPI IW is somehow could be also revisited while adjusting the minimum wage. And we must have to delink the food and non-food expenditure from our minimum wage basket. So there is no logic of linking non-food expenditure with food expenditure, or like the present list 25% and 20% linked with the food expenditure. That's why this is a criticism that has been also addressed in our committee report, that we have very much scientifically calculated all these aspects. So let me just go through enforcement. That is very, very important part in terms of minimum wage. So there are 20 regional labor offices for central sphere in all over country. ALC, RLC, deputy CLC level officers, they are appointed to address the enforcement issues. They go to the ground, they visit the establishments, There are labor enforcement officer from the very junior level also I have highlighted here. So they are the main, officers responsible for enforcement of labor laws in India, basically for the central labor laws. So as I have already highlighted that there are also state level enforcement officers. They are responsible for the state level, the industries that come under the state purview, and the industries that come under the central sphere purview or the central government. Then the central labor officers, CLS officers, basically they are responsible for the enforcement. And I have always also in the previous slide I have mentioned that any law that will be only be very effective and it will serve its purpose if the enforcement is done very nicely and the enforcement is done timely, and that enforcement or implementation, you could say also implementation of these laws are depend on the enforcement agencies. So lastly, conclusion, I would come to my conclusion. See, the effective implementation of minimum wage is an issue I just highlighted. So frequent meeting of the boards. So there are different boards as I mentioned in terms of trade union and labor laws. So whenever any decision is taken, then trade unions representatives are called. They have to be, they give their opinions, So the frequent consultation by both the trade unions as well as employer organization are very important. So whenever you are fixing minimum wage, take the tripartite consultation, into confidence and take the most advantage of this thing. So during a crisis time, let me also say, we have to revive the spending cycle, and minimum wage is a very important component to revive the spending cycle during the present COVID crisis. So say consumption spending, government spending, investment and trade are the most important aspects for our economic growth. So now the evidence says 100 rupees growth in GDP comes from 60 to 70 rupees growth in consumption spending, and the consumption spending could be actually revived through wage and income support. That's why my personal view says, even if you are bringing any scheme, so in scheme the minimum wage has to be linked there. So you will be, I think you will be aware about that. So Norega doesn't, give minimum wage, that we all know. So Norega has delinked its wage with minimum wage. So maybe there is a burden on exchequer and the objective of the scheme is different. But my personal view says, whatever schemes you come, whatever establishment also you come out with, so until unless you are reviving the consumption spending, you are giving money in the hands of the people, you are giving money, hands of the masses, like the labor class in the lower, who were in the lower category, you can say in the lower, ladder of the total, categorization of the higher class and lower class people. That personally I could say that the 60 to 70% people who could revive their minimum wage, who could revive their wage, revive their income, which should revive the consumption spending, and maybe will come out the crisis. So let me thank all of you for your patience hearing. I know this topic is bit also, any questions you find, I'll try to answer you, and thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Now the floor is open for question answer hour. If anybody want to ask question, please you can ask. The floor is open.
Sipai, there is a question in the chat box by Boyluchan.
Yeah. Actually, let me see. Boyluchan has asked a very nice question. Bikash, can you enlighten, does any step taken by government to have relatively more uniform minimum wage rather than so many minimum wage law which create problem in implementation? Any step taken by the government?
Yes. So as I mentioned that, Code on Wages 2019 has been enacted. In the last August, it was enacted. and there is a provision, framing rules under the Act. So when we are framing the minimum wage rule, this has been there, means I also mentioned during my lecture. So now the minimum wage will be applicable irrespective of sector, irrespective of employment, irrespective of geography. That's why there will be reduction in the number of minimum wages. So like 2000 types of minimum wages we already saw in my presentation. So that will be completely reduced to very less numbers.
Yes. Hello.
There is two question by Tanushree Raut. What is the Payment of Gratuity Act and what it speaks about? Then second is what is rate tapism and how it is ended by Labor Code.
Okay. Payment of Gratuity Act is asking. Payment of Gratuity Act, so, okay, let me address it later. So let me address the second question. What is rate tapism, I think? What Jadav has asked? Rate tapism?
What is rate tapism? How is it ended by labor law?
See, actually what happens that any kind of complaints that comes to, different, stakeholders, like one labor is complaining that he is not getting minimum wage. So what happens that has to be addressed in a very time-bound manner. So in the bureaucratic hustles, I could say somehow it gets delayed. The rate tapism means in the file it is closed. So it will be taken care only when, you could say, there is some kind of, information you have, or you are that much aware that yes, your work is pending. You are also trying to speak the officer, see my work is pending and all. So it depends on many things. So rate tapism basically implies the delay in, the delaying the work, which has to be actually addressed in a very timely manner, but it has not happened.
Hello, because I have a question in my mind. Actually, in Ravensa University, there are some employees there, those who are working in hostel. Boylochan and other people who are studying Ravensa, they know now they are getting 4,000 rupees per month as their salary, and before 2 years they were getting 2,000, and in my time they were getting 400 per month. So forget about the past, but still now they are getting 4,000 rupees per month. If you calculate on an average, they're getting Delhi as 125 or like this. This is the wage of this laborer. So when I asked them to fight for this thing, and the authority are telling that they are not our employee, there are no official record. But if you see from the register office, they are getting the salary and all the things are recorded. But the authority always deny them that they are not any more employee of Ravensa. They are just working in the contract basis. And this is but if you see East Hostel, West Hostel, those West Hostel are established from 1921. Many laborers working from there from the 50 years back. So that things how we deal the situation. And it is really a very precarious situation. I always thinking so, but being a part of this institution and fight against the institution also a great challenge for me. So can you give some idea how to protect these people?
Yes, brother. Now, see, the important thing is very recently the Odisha government has notified minimum wage on across sectors.
Yes.
This is 280 rupees per day. So for unskilled. So
yes.
if you see the notification, so one, as I also mentioned, that wage is a subject of both state government and central government. So you please ask the area labor inspector. See, this is the minimum wage has been notified by the Odisha government. So the minimum, the least one should get is 280 rupees per day. So why they are getting less than that? So I think we will address this the very first thing. And if they are working more than 10 years, so definitely they have to be shifted to semi-skilled kind of thing. Yes. So the work experience also counted. So, I
Yes.
mean, you must show the notification to the labor enforcement officer, and you should highlight it at a proper, I can say authority who could actually address this issue. And even it doesn't happen, also please tell me, and I will ask to labor officer if they could actually solve.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Actually.
So there is another question by Dr. Jairan Singh Samal.
Hmm.
To tackle present crisis, on one hand, rebate and relaxation are given to factory owners. On the
Hmm.
other hand, labor rights are being limited. Don't it shows class angle is ignored?
No, that's also I mentioned during my lecture. See, labor is not the only factor of production. I told once you go by this kind of assumption that reducing wage or reducing their you can say what entitlement, you could find a revival in economy. This is wrong as per my personal view. So what you have to see that already you have given many relaxations compensation in terms of other factors of production, say in their management you are giving in terms of loan, you are giving compensation in terms of financial aid. So when you must keep this wage part intact, I mean to say you should not harm the minimum wage at least. So there should not be no negotiation in minimum wage. So minimum wage is statutory and it is non-negotiable. So as Joyram is asking the very right question, many states have actually trying to regulate depending on their own I can say compulsion or own the own situation. But I don't know why I am not a supporter of cutting labor rights. Actually, I always think that labor welfare is the ultimate law in any country. Welfare of the public is the ultimate law. So any law will not be applicable if their rights or their entitlement is curtailed.
There, there are a few questions from the live stream. One question is by Vinod Sethi. The question is, can you cite any example are uh, that what are the acts that have been enacted and enforced with due consultation of trade unions? Who are those
Okay.
trade unions, namely, please?
Yes. See, like I mentioned, that code on wages, that act has been enacted in the year of 2019. So the trade unions I mentioned, there are 12 central trade unions, like Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, Intalk, So all these major trade unions, they are called to the consultation process. They come to discuss with different stakeholders like the employers organization, the independent members, the experts. And in the last year, I think code on wages 2019 has been enacted, and it has been done with due consultation process with the trade unions, and it's all 12 central trade unions.
There is a question by Devasis Bhai. Under the present COVID-19 situation, whether minimum wage is going to boost employment or is a hurdle to it. Demand for and supply for labor has any role? Question mark.
Yes, I mentioned the same thing. Minimum wage has to be set in a very balanced manner. So minimum wage, there are very less evidence that minimum wage has adverse employment effects. So if you read or go through the papers by Umarani and Patrick Belzer by the ILO, you could find the evidence rather minimum wage has more components to reduce poverty and inequality. So the unemployment effect is negligible. So once there are two kind of advantages we find from minimum. It will reduce poverty, it will reduce inequality, it will also boost consumption, spending cycle. So minimum wage has the potential to boost consumption spending in the economy. So nowhere there are very less evidence in for the small medium enterprises. There are very less evidence that minimum wage is going to distort, the production or the cost.
There is a question by Vinod Sethi. The unorganized sector is comprising of 94% of the total labor force of the country. What are the
Okay.
provisions made by the government to address their problems? And there is a second
Yes.
part to the question I like to also, which
Please
is
tell.
that the suspension of factory laws, thereby compelling women workers to work in the night. What's your opinion on this?
Okay. The first question, would you like to repeat, Vishwajit?
Yes.
First question.
So, question is the unorganized sector is comprised of 94% of the total labor
Uh,
force of the country. What are the
hmm.
provisions made by the government to address their problems?
Okay, I also, highlighted when I talked in my presentation. So there is, a proper act that was amended during 1979. So this is known as Unorganized Sector Social Security Act. So this act had all the provisions which could have actually saved the present migrant crisis. So presently, what happened, I told, in the unorganized sector, through the building and construction workers says they were given rupees 1,000 to rupees 6,000 depending on the states. So the states, they immediately dispersed the money after a advisory by the ministry. So in first aspects they were able to get help, and secondly, what happened that I also told that there are other provisions of social security. So though I will keep just bit, the workers who they are covered through EPFO and ESIC, though they are somehow not considered as unorganized worker. So once you are covered in ESIC and EPF, so these kind of provisions, we are thinking that more and more workers we need to bring into them organized sector. So I mean to say that more, if you are taken under organized sector, then there will be scope. There will be very much scope that you can get immediate help whenever you are in need or whenever there any kind of emergency comes. The second question basically, suspension. So I also mentioned that suspension of labor laws depends, as I have already mentioned, this is a both state and center subject. The states do as per their own situation and own convenience, but the central government, somehow also gives advice time to time that whatever you do by keeping the welfare of the labor in mind. So don't go for any kind of you know provisions of suspension of provisions which is harmful in long term, and we are also signatories of ILO. So anything we do, we have to give answers at international forum. So we all have to be very careful whenever we are doing any kind of suspension of labor laws. So thirdly, I could say for the women workers that has been engaged, that has to be allowed to be engaged. uh, Personally, I find if the working conditions and safety has been provided, so it has to be welcome, and it is a welcoming step also.
Another question by Dhiren Kumar. Because is it audible? Hello?
Yes, yes,
If minimum dignified wage is right and it can be enforceable, why it has never been our political agenda of our national and regional parties, and nor in our masses agenda, nor in the agenda of middle classes who are our political and policy bosses.
yes.
His question is why if the minimum dignified wage should be enforceable in everywhere.
Expected question from Dhiren.
Hello?
See,
Yeah.
I also mentioned that minimum wage, is a sustenance wage, right? So it is minimum wage is also, we cannot say it is a dignified wage also. So I told that we must go towards living wage. So when you move from minimum wage to living wage, the living wage is reasonably, I can say, dignified wage. So even the average wage, you will be astonished to know the average wage is somehow less than minimum wages in different sectors. So we need to increase it gradually. So I personally believe that the minimum wage is statutory, and if it is enforced properly, then definitely it will lead us towards living wage. But I am not very sure. I cannot also very much comment on this, that how we are going to do. But one thing I can say in the rule, that once it is set, the minimum wage set with evidences, with scientific methodology, by taking care of the economic factors, by taking care many different aspects of the labor, then gradually we can catch up the kind of dignified wage for unskilled labor the trade unions are demanding, like rupees 18,000 per month for unskilled labor. So in one jump you may not achieve this, but gradually, if you increase gradually and timely, the states increase it with variable dearness allowances, then gradually we can catch towards a dignified wage. Thank you.
Bhai, there is a need for explanation. Lakshmikant Rana is a student who asks, does he need explanations on unskilled and class C city, unskilled labor and class C city?
Okay. See, unskilled labor basically sweated labor. जैसे हम I can speak in also with Hindi or Odia also. It means so any kind of physical activity that doesn't require any kind of expertise or any kind of experience. You could do it without experience. You could do it without knowledge. You could do it without any kind of technical support, like I told example, loading unloading. You just need your physical power. So that kind of work is termed as unskilled work. So any technicality, suppose you are an ITI, so then ITI gives you some skills that how to do mechanical work and other work. So unskilled is that. So it means specifically it is physical work. Second, and doesn't require any kind of technicalities. And second, area C, basically I mean the Ministry of Finance that has notified different areas in terms of HR component, house rent component. So accordingly, area C basically implies the rural area, where and the area A is implying the cities like Delhi, Bombay, and other areas, urban towns, and the semi-urban towns are area B. So area C, B, A are geographical regions basically, but in case of minimum wage, we follow the notification of Ministry of Finance that has been done for HR component calculation for different regions in India. Thank you.
Bhai, I have a question.
Deepak. Yes.
Very nice presentation. My question is, recently people are saying some of industrial setups, including manufacturing sector and also as well as service sector, they are shifting from China. Okay. So do you think that you told about code on wage bill? Suppose this code on wage bill passed or it is notified, do you think that it would have an impact on our minimum wage or wage rate, so that this because of rational wage or minimum wage, these industrial setup or industrial units, they will come and set up in India, else they will go to the states like South Asian states, South Asian nations, or East Asian nation like Bangladesh, Myanmar, or Singapore, where minimum wages are relatively lower than India. So what is your view on that?
Okay, Deepak. See, the wages are different from the minimum wages, the very first thing, right? So we have to, when we say the average wage. So the average wage and the minimum wage and the wages, these are three are different things. So what say, if one worker is working for 9 hours, so 8 hours and 1 hour, the rest that is given in the Factories Act. So from this aspect, I will come to your question. See, so if they are working for 9 hours, then they are putting their hard work. So I do not think any country for bringing investment or allowing the foreign companies should compromise in part of minimum wage. And I also mentioned in my presentation, not paying minimum wage lead to bonded labor. So wage part is bit different, and though it is linked, so the wage level is low, not minimum wage. Minimum wage is guaranteed. I also saw in terms of Brazil, in terms of South Africa, in terms of Russia, in terms of China. Minimum wage, the provincial wage is fixed by the central government, and even the provincial rates are there. You cannot pay less than that. So if code on wages bill passed, what is the important thing will happen? First of all, the minimum wage, it may be a single or it may be some multiple wages, that will be mandatory for all the regions in India. So there will not, across sector, across employment and across occupation. So there will not be multiplicity. So the code on wages will address that. So it will simplify the minimum wage system in India that one can easily understand. So secondly, I would say that once the minimum wage is very much understandable and very much effectively implemented, it will maintain the efficiency of the labor. Once the efficiency is maintained, somehow the skilling aspect will gradually catch up. So no, you could actually gradually make them skill. If you don't pay them wage, what will happen? So that is another aspect. But if you don't pay them minimum wage, then definitely there is a question arises. So I think no country will want at the cost of minimum wage they are going to allow the companies from China.
I think there is no question now.
I have
If there is, okay. Sir.
I have two questions. First, how do you, in a personal note, how do you see the idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat? Because it's also talking about labor reform in India. Second, also when you're talking Atmanirbhar, we're also talking about technological development. That means we are bringing artificial intelligence and other things to challenge Chinese growth, right? So how do you see these two new challenges to India's labor sector? And what would be your suggestion on that?
Thank you, Jaydev, for your first question.
See, let me start from your second question. So, in your second question, you are trying to speak about fourth industrial revolution, right? I talked sometimes while I was discussing with you in previous lectures. The fourth industrial revolution is focusing on the artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, the blockchain technology, many technologies that is, going to, be the part of the manufacturing industries. So in all these sectors, what will happen that you will be needing some amount of skilled from your workers. But in India, the majority of amount of workers who are working in unorganized sector are unskilled. So that's why we have to prepare our demography for all these kinds of challenges, that they could get some amount of skill to deal with and to retain their employment where they are employed. And they must not lose their employment because of this kind of challenges coming. I also told, if you go and read the future of work report by ILO, they have also now questioning that no, it's not about technology, human approach to technology. So it means even if these robotics and other aspects of fourth industrial revolution are coming, so the human approach needs to be revived, and by which, according to, you have to skill your worker, but you must retain their living standard. So I see that there will be challenge because the world of work definitely will change. See, like, we are talking on webinar. So many things will come like this. So many you also aware about the gig economy. So you are also aware about the care services. The new kind of occupations are coming. So it's not about only technology. It's about the changing scenario of the economy, both in domestic and as well as in international scenario. That's why we have to be very prepared. So in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat, see, Atmanirbhar is a very, very important and novel concept, I would say, because everybody has to be Atmanirbhar. So if once you are self-sufficient, definitely you have scope for more, I could say other aspects, and you could the last days also I just read an article in the Hindu. So we are facing three kind of challenges: guns, jobs, and steel crisis. So in China, for China we are facing the gun crisis, and in health sector we are facing jobs crisis, and in terms of economy we are facing steel kind of crisis. So in all these crises has to be tackled in the future. Like Singaporean example you could take, that how they have been Atmanirbhar, how their income has been very much sustained. So the Lee Kuan Yew, who started the revolution during 60s in Singapore, who had a promise with the foreign companies. See, I don't need unskilled worker. My Singaporeans have to be skilled over a period of time. Once you also do your worker skilled and give them a respectable and dignified treatment, the Atmanirbhar Bharat will be more fruitful and helpful. So otherwise, protecting the dignity and the wage security, social security of the labor, Atmanirbhar Bharat may not be successful. So that's why I would always, being a I could say I always raise my voice for labor welfare and labor dignity. So even though I say this is Atmanirbhar Bharat is a very very important concept, but we have to materialize now. There is no time will come. Again and again we cannot wait. With another concept. See, we have to really establish. Even in China example, you see their local level industries, how local level enterprises are actually have actually been the backbone of the China's economy. So that's why Atmanirbhar Bharat is a very good beginning, and we hope we'll sustain on this concept over a period of time. And secondly, let me say, so now the international trade is stopped because of the definitely world kind of situation. Once the trade is opened, what will happen? Once the international trade WTO pressure will come, what will happen? So are we prepared on that front? So that has to be also very carefully thought. I am very sure that many economists, they are in the government, they have thought on this, because once the international trade is reviving, then also there will be more challenge to Atmanirbhar Bharat. So I think we are prepared and we are ready, but I would raise my voice personally at personal level. Skilling and dignified wage will actually be an important component of Atmanirbhar Bharat, Jadav.
Any question?
If yes allowed, then I would like to ask another question.
Please.
Yes, please.
So if you're looking at this Make in India and Digital India, right, these two big promises made by the government, I think the early stage of the formation of the government, I think somewhere down the line, you think that there is a lot of voices rather than work. So there are a lot of academic reservations are there for this Atmanirbhar slogan. So from a policy perspective, from an academic perspective, what would be your suggestions on this? Looking at this Digital India and Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Question, what is question, Jadav? Question kya hai?
Looking at this Digital India and Make in India, right? A lot of promises were made during the early stage of this particular government, right? Nothing has come up in concrete way. So the way we are proposing this Atmanirbhar Bharat and the way we are challenging the Chinese goods, right? And also the way we are saying that the future of trade is different. I think there are a lot of challenges or there are a lot of voices are made for Atmanirbhar Bharat. There is no concrete idea or like concrete support were there for the laborers and other industries.
Okay. But dear, I think what happens, see, it's not that we have not kept our promise. It's about, it's also, I would like to highlight that we have somehow reduced the poverty, reduced on inequality, have increased our wealth in subsequent times, and whatever in the kind of digital India, we are able to talk in webinar, right? So that has to be there in the rural area. So the penetration will go gradually. And you know that there are different national projects which is taking care of the internet connectivity in rural areas and connecting all the panchayats in different, with a promised BharatNet and all. So these are the important things. I think they have been taken care, and government always try to focus that. Government always try to focus that how we can actually grow as a nation. So I do not think that they have not kept promise, but I think we have to see it in a very academic as well as professional manner. I think work has been done, and in India is a huge country, and it will take time. Everything takes time. So I think gradually will also our internet, mobile penetration. You see, many people have the mobile, but how they are using is a different thing. But I think that we have somehow going to be successful in terms of digital India, and digital India is the key, I think, for any kind of programs in future that we are going to have. Jaydev, I think this is bit out of topic, but I try to answer from my own knowledge. Huh?
I think we should stop here the question answer hour. Is it okay now? Anybody interested to ask? I request another young economist with us, Deepak, to remark with a few words in this lecture. Some people are want to hear from you what exactly the things is going on, and you can give us some angle. Very few words you can point. Can you please? I request Deepak.
Thank you, Sibhai. Thank you, Sibhai. Actually, the way Bikash Bhai narrated the aspect of minimum wage and also different labor laws associated to minimum wage. So I think many of the students, they have learned many things, and only thing is that this, I think, this labor laws intention is that how we can rationalize that. As Bikash Bhai told, there are around 40 labor laws. So 40 labor laws, yes, it is expected that considering the diversity of this country, related to regional diversity, related to gender, class, caste, each and every aspect, and the need of the states also different, and also in addition to that, the requirement of market. What is market is also what market wants. Whether market wants 175 rupees of minimum wage or 250 rupees of minimum wage. That is also a challenge. So considering all these aspects and also the interest of labor, that they have formulated around 40 labor laws. So I think this is the hour to rationalize all these things so that our market would be more competitive, and we can grasp the advantage not only in national level or at the state level, but also at international level, so that whenever any industries or any sectors or any industrial setup or units related to either manufacturing sector or service sector, they suppose want to shift one country to other countries, so that opportunity. So India could grasp that opportunity. So we have to also look at that. And as I told, suppose we can take the example of one sector in which historically India was rich, like textile and apparel sector. In case of textile and apparel sector, what is happening? Suppose many industrial units, they are shifting from China, but at the same time, they are not coming to India. We have raw material, we have market, but still they are not coming to India. Rather, they are coming to Myanmar or Bangladesh. What is the reason? The reason is not only related to minimum wage, but also other international aspects also there. So you have to also think about that. Suppose being the underdeveloped country or less developed country, Myanmar and Bangladesh, they have treaty with European country and US country like US, European countries, that there will be zero duty. There would be zero duty. That suppose Myanmar exported any apparel or textile material to European Union, then they will impose zero duty. At the same time, when India exported, they would impose around 10 to 12% of duties. So at the same time, we have to also look at this international aspect. So suppose if we sign FTA agreement, free trade agreement related to this apparel or textile sector with European countries or US countries, then our textile and apparel sector, they would be competitive, internationally competitive. So minimum wage is as Bikash bhai told, minimum wage is has an prominent or is an important tool or important aspect looking at the Indian market, Indian labor market. As he told that Indian labor, not only labor in India but also internationally, they should be treated with in a dignified manner. So it was a nice talk, Bikash bhai, and from the bottom of my heart and also from all the members of Aama Prayas family, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to you. And I think further we would continue such type of talk so that students and also other people, they would be benefited from this talk, such type of lecture series. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you for your encouragement.
Thank you, Deepak. Actually, indeed, really, it is a insightful and very informative lecture given by Bikash. And whatever he has mentioned, like on the basis of the Workers' Right, Employment Compensation Act, Social Security, marginalized, how to protect the marginalized, and all the things very vividly described, and the methods basically very interesting was I asked you how to calculate all the things. It is a very important things you have mentioned, the method of calculating and the report which has you have regionalized the 19 region. So these things also I have interest to show me how you regionalize all the labor, the minute to the on the consumption basket on the basis. These things also very interesting. Really, we enjoyed your lecture. It is excellent in that way. That is informative and many things we learn. And your way of presenting the all the things was fabulous. And I thankful on behalf of Aama Prayas family, and I thank to Bikash, and also I thank to the our technical master. Jaidev, who is facilitating all the things in a very smooth manner, irrespective of lightning, bijli, ghadgadi, but he has come and he has eradicated all the things and challenge, and finally he achieved to connect to all of us. So that is really a very great things he has done. So thank you, Jaidev. And again, I request to all the member, not only in our group. So we should choose some of the people of eminence from different sectors, from the other area, by which the things will be more interest. Our group people will also give lecture simultaneously. We have to find out some of the people of eminence from other area. That things will be decided by Wednesday, Thursday, because if it will delay, then automatically the things will be we cannot accommodate all the people. Another things I want to mention, the registration. Suppose when somebody registering, then we should give them mail before 2 to 3 hour. Also, we should give them messages through WhatsApp and their personal number, by which they can connect us easily. So that at the 11th hour, if you send him the mail and messages, that will also some people may be excluded from taking this thing. So that thing should will keep in mind to encourage the audience to our group. So that thing really it was a great initiative by the Prayas family, and also it will give an example for all of the society. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Sibbai. Thank you, Jadev. Thank you, Deepak. Yes, Jadev, please tell.
No, actually, we should thank Mr. Biswajit Pani.
Yes, thank you, Biswajit.
Yes. Sorry, I forgotten. sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.